order. The purpose of this meeting is to discuss the possibility of Tiffin's Halloween trick-or-treat due to COVID-19, as well as Dr. Megan McBride's email to council regarding the 8 Can't Wait platform, as well as any other business to come before the committee. So I'd like to start out the meeting due to Dr. McBride. Thank you for joining us. I believe she has a conflict at 3:30. So I definitely want to have address this topic first. So with that, if I can pass it over to Dr. McBride and let you kind of re-explain maybe what your email and proposal to council is, or what your concerns are. And then I will also allow Chief Stevens to comment as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you for having me in for this time. Is sound okay? Everybody can hear okay? Awesome. So I actually don't know if I have concerns, and I had the opportunity to talk to Chief really briefly at an event a few weeks ago, and he was able to really elaborate on some of the things that I didn't know. So the 8 Can't Wait campaign looks at these 8 key components through like law enforcement, and it has compiled data over longitudinal studies exploring like what helps to reduce police violence. And listening to the chief, a lot of these things are already there, and there's a lot of policies that they're already doing or have in place. And some of the things that we're seeing now in our state and our areas across the country are exploring like where we're getting it right, what's going really well, and where can we grow, because there's always spaces to grow. So my email was to get a better understanding, to get a fuller understanding. What's in place? What are the policies that we're doing? My understanding is that there's an extensive amount of training actually that Chief has his team do that goes above and beyond, you know, the requirements. So if there's things we're doing really well or meeting some of these 8 components, sharing that, putting that out there. And then if some of these 8 we're not, getting a better understanding of what the barriers are to putting those in place, or ways that we can support to get those things in place, because collectively, when these 8 policies are in place, police violence can go down up to 72%. I think we have low rates, but again, you know, everything we do is always working to improve that. And we're seeing a lot more publication of the areas and the communities that have these in place to show the work that's being done, to show the safe communities and safety in a really robust intersectional way. So it's less concern and more like seeking understanding, and then the understanding of what's being done and things that we can do to continue to improve the community.
Sure, no, that makes sense. Chief Stevens, do you want to address that?
Sure. One of the things I sent everybody was a long laundry list of some of the stuff that's already in place. And I did talk to Dr. McBride at the event, and you know, passed on to her a lot of the stuff that she's talking about. I don't know if you were in that email chain or anything that got any of that stuff, but I certainly can email you everything that I emailed them. You all saw the email. So right after that protest that we had, I had a concerned citizen send me the 8 stuff, and I was not aware of the national campaign at the time. So I answered her the way that I would answer any citizen, with I considered that a public records request. So you all saw the email back and forth with her, even though I was on vacation. And then when I came back, my first day, I got all the stuff that I emailed you. So I included in that email, and included with what I sent to you guys, the last few years, I think it was 4 or 5 years worth of our use of force stats. So we're already doing the required comprehensive reporting that's in that 8. You know, it's an analysis that is in our policies and procedures that I'm required to do. Every officer is required to fill out that use of force report, and you had a copy of that included in that email as well. So it's very extensive. It's a 1-page, all kinds of boxes and fill-ins and everything that's not only the suspect's actions, but the officer's actions. And it's twofold. Number one, it gives me that end of the year data that I can accumulate for that comprehensive reporting, but it also highlights which of the forces are being used, the gender, the sex, the age, and the race of the force being utilized on resistive suspects. And I compare that with how many arrests we've done in a year. And you can see, and ever since I've been chief, and even before that, the records show that we do a very minimum amount per the amount of arrests that we do a year. Over 1,000 arrests a year, and we'll have like 11 incidences of use of force. And of those use of force incidences, you know, whether it's 20 or 11 or whatever, those are broken down into the categories of what type of force was used. Did we just merely point a gun at somebody? Did we just merely point a taser at somebody? Was it just the taser was spark tested to the person to get them into compliance? Was the taser actually used? Was mace used? Was taking them to the ground, you know, in there? So you can break it down in those categories. And then further, you can see which officers are involved in all those incidences. So it kind of gives you an early warning trigger system of if you have 11 incidences and an officer is involved in all 11 incidents of those, you obviously got a problem. You don't have to wait to the end of the year to understand that. So that part of it's taken care of. In all the policies and procedures that I sent you, one of the things that should be understood is that when I started on the department in 1993, I got a huge 3-ring binder of policies and procedures. And this was before accreditations and all that other stuff was prevalent. And all those were updated by the captain and the lieutenants and sergeants and stuff. And when they would come down, you get it in your mailbox and you have to put that policy in there. But that took time, you know, to disseminate down through our organization, which is just 30 people. Can you imagine it, like Dr. McBride is saying, throughout the nation when you have a 3,000 man department or 300 man department or 3,000 or New York Police Department, 40,000 man department, you know, so some things can get lost in the translation and the dissemination of that stuff. So we went to CALIA in the early 2000s, and that lasted for about 10 years. And we were CALIA, which is the accreditation, national accreditation. You pay them you show them that you're doing all the policies and procedures and stuff that you're doing. In 2012 or 2009, we started getting into some economic issues or whatever. And when I became the chief of police in 2012, that was one of the things that I didn't want to do it, but we got rid of CALIA. And when I say I got rid of it, I meant that we just stopped paying another agency to tell us that we were doing what we were supposed to be doing. So that saved thousands of dollars to the city's budget. But we continued to keep our policies updated through what came down through case law, what came down from the prosecutor's office or from the director of law, Brent Howard, or best practices, you know, when you go to certain trainings or whatever. So we're in those email groups and we're in that training groups and stuff like that. But that is, again, a liability that you take upon yourself to make sure that you're getting the most current training and what the new case law is in a sufficient amount of time so that your officers are applying the new case law or the new training or the new methods of use of force or whatever at a time so that you don't get sued. So take that fast forward to when Governor Kasich, I included that letter as well. When he came out, when the Ferguson incident happened, and then President Obama put out the 21st Century Policing and put those mandates out. And then Governor Kasich had a task force put together of the 7 recommendations. Back then I sent council, the law director, the mayor, and the city administrator a breakdown of all 7 of those recommendations that came out of that task force of what police departments should be doing and what they're going to be held to. And we were already doing 6 of the 7. The 7th one was in the email, like I pointed out to everybody, was beyond our control. That's where they recommended that all officer-involved shootings go to a statewide grand jury and not a local county prosecutor jury or grand jury or something like that. Again, that was beyond our control. But all the other 6 we were currently doing, and I even put out the areas of how we were completing what Governor Kasich had asked for. And then about a year later, because of that, the Ohio Association of Chiefs of Police were asked to have a committee put together of chiefs of police that could start looking at policies and procedures that were put out by the state that was put together, the board that Governor Kasich put together of civilians and other people on this board that wanted to get some type of standards across in Ohio. because you have villages that have 1 or 2 officers part-time in there. You have sheriff's office that are large and small. You have police departments that are large and small agencies, and everybody has their own, varying degrees of policies and procedures. For example, when I took over the village of Republic in 2003 to 2006 as a sergeant, I was a part-time chief of police there, and their policy and procedure book was probably about 10 pages worth. So I took our CALIA policies here, took 6 months to strip them down to a village, and we immediately gained a decrease in our insurance, and their standards were raised at that village. But that's not the norm across the state of Ohio. So the goal of the Ohio Collaboration Committee on the OACP, but also what Governor Kasich put together, was to start issuing 1, 2, or 3 policies a year. And this was, again, we're talking 3-4 years ago. And then you get certified, and this was a voluntary program. Well, I got in on the ground floor because we used to be CALIA. Our policies are still above CALIA. So I was placed on the committee. I expressed interest in the OACP and sent my name in as to be one of the persons on the committee. So I was on the ground floor of the first year of pushing out those policies and standards. And one of them was use of force, recruitment, bias-based policing, all that stuff. There's like 11 or 12 of them now over the course of the 3 or 4 years. So again, 3 or 4 a year, like we're talking about. And so we got the draft of what that committee put together. We put the police officer eyes to it and said, well, you're going to have, because we have to look at it from how this is going to affect small agencies that might only have 1 or 2 officers, and all the way to large agencies like Columbus Police Department or Cuyahoga Sheriff's Office and stuff like that. So there was probably about 10 of us in that committee. And then once all the wording got moved back and forth, this was a standard that was put out. So Tiffin is one of the few that are Ohio Collaborative. If you go to their website, US, Fostoria Police Department are the only ones in Seneca County that are have the standards, and those are recurring standards. So just because you signed off on the first year and an assessor came and looked at your documentation, looked at your training, looked at your policy, you have to keep every couple of years proving that you're still doing what you're saying that you're doing. Again, this is a free program through the state. It doesn't cost us anything. We're not paying the state like we did CALIA, but it has that stamp of approval of that committee that was put together by Governor Kasich, and that's still going on now. Another thing that we did, so that was the first step of getting our policies and procedures some recognition, I guess, or some up to a higher standard than what the minimum standard is. So the fire chief and I both had approached the city administrator and the mayor about our policies and procedures and how much of a time vacuum that it is in not only our time as the head of our agencies, but then delegating out to a lieutenant or sergeants or to help with the numerous chapters of our policies and procedures. So we looked around, and Lexipol is an agency that we do pay, but they burden the liability on making sure that they push out the most current federal laws that change immediately, the most state, and the best practices. So when you see our policies and procedures and you're looking through those pages, like say, for example, the use of force one, you will see under each of the headers of the chapters of the articles underneath there, like 300.3 use of force, you'll see a box that says federal, and then you'll see a box that says OCLEAC, and that's the Ohio Collaborative and what you're being held to those standards and stuff. So again, that's another area that the Tiffin Police Department is voluntarily doing at this point. But again, now based on what's going on nationally, not only the Ferguson started this thing, but what happened in Minnesota with George Floyd, now Governor DeWine is trying to make this mandatory. So we're way ahead of the curve of any agencies that haven't jumped on board and tried to make their policies up to the Ohio standards. So there's nothing that the Tiffin Police Department has to do to meet the current 12 standards that are out there, because we already are approved and certified as a group 1, 2, 3, and 4 of the standards. And all those things that you're talking about in those 8 8 can't wait stuff are inside our use of force policies, inside our responding to critical incidences and de-escalation tactics and stuff are all in there. The duty to intervene, that's in there in the use of force already. It's right up front, you know, in 300.2.1 of the use of force. And that's a federal and a Ohio collaborative one as well. So again, just to answer all of Dr. McBride's outlining questions that I didn't answer that day, I'm willing to, you know, take on any of the categories and explain why that we already have it in a policy, or for like, you won't see it in our policy use of force continuum. We used to have that in CLIA, and we used to have that before CLIA, but when we went Ohio Collaborative, as you can see, it's not a federal requirement, it's not a state requirement, nor is it Ohio Collaborative requirement, because it's kind of gone to the wayside because each of the agencies kind of come up with their own. I could show you I downloaded 6 different diagrams, and that's of 100 different ones that are out there for different departments. So there's no one standard of a use of force continuum, and there's no law out there that says that you have to have a use of force continuum. What we do train to is what the Constitution is. And in Graham versus Connor, which came about in 1989, was a 1984 case. Graham versus Connor points out the objective reasonableness test. And that's what's trained in all our officers training, and it's spelled out in that use of force policy. If you look under the 300.3.2, factors used to determine the reasonableness of force, which is a federal and Ohio collaborative standard, and it lists out A through Q of the use of force. When determining whether to apply force and evaluating whether an officer has used reasonable force, a number of factors should be taken into consideration as time and circumstances permit. And these factors include, but are not limited to, and you can, for purposes of not hogging up all the time or using a lot of verbiage, you can read through the A through Q there, which is a ton of split-second decisions that the officers have to make, but they're going to be held to this reasonableness, objective reasonableness standard after the fact. And that's what Graham versus Connor in the Supreme Court says, is that you cannot go back in time and do a hindsight 2020, a static 2-degree or 2-dimensional use of force standard that says you got to start here. And if you don't apply all of those things, then you could be what some people are holding you to, a different standard, and that's not what the Constitution is. So that's really the only one that I see in here that is not, and the one about requiring a warning before shooting, that is in here as well. But as you know, you can't write a policy for all situations. So if an officer walks up, if you put that in there that says you must require a warning that, hey, I'm going to shoot you before shooting, and then an officer on video doesn't do that because the situation doesn't dictate it, meaning that he walks up to get him to sign a citation, and the guy just pulls a gun and starts shooting, are you really required to tell him that you're going to shoot back? You know, so you can't, I guess, handcuff and put in there an absolute, knowing that there could be situations where you cannot do the required warning before shooting. So those really are the only 2 that I see that aren't fully covered 100% the way that they want to adopt all 8 of those. But the other 6 we have no issues with because they're already covered in our policies and procedures. Does that help a little bit, Dr. McBride?
No, I think that helps a ton, and that's kind of some of what I was gathering from when we talked. But it sounds like so many of these pieces are in place, and it sounds like it would be hard to require or to compile all of that data, and you have that. There is a registry, like we're not currently on it, so like the 8 Can't Wait campaign, but there's also like various like indexes that show these pieces in communities, showing that community has already been meeting those standards or has risen to the occasion and is putting those pieces in place.
Who puts that together? I mean, who like, I've never been contacted by them to say, send me your stuff so we can evaluate to see if you're on that.
I think, well, it was in that link I sent, but I could pull it up and email it over to you on how that happens, because I think that those are things to be really proud of. And anytime that we can reduce misunderstanding or diminish lack of knowledge, I think that's really powerful. And I know that, you know, you gave us just an abbreviated
yes.
version of it, but that also spanned years of work and
Oh,
policies and things. Like, I think it's important for people to know that those are in place, because as you know, like there's some spaces where that care and that attention aren't taken. But if we are, I think that's something to highlight. And so that was like my piece is, I don't know if I'm concerned, but I want to know what's in place. Maybe we have these 8 pieces or 7 covered, and that's a really big deal. Like if we're looking large scope, that's a big deal that those are in place, and that they were in place before it was required. It was just because it was what was best for the community. So I think putting that out there is also really important.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, great. Yes, Mayor Mons.
Thank you, Councilman Boyle. I just want to echo, I'm not going to repeat everything Chief said, but Chief did a very good job explaining things, and I cannot reiterate enough to council. I know several of you are new, and you weren't here when we adopted Lexipol with the city, but both chiefs would tell you, and I think the vast majority of our firefighter EMTs and our police officers would tell you that system has been wonderful, because there are constant changes to both state and federal policing policy, laws, and for smaller governments like the city of Tiffin to just try to keep up with all of them and hope to find out every change that's being passed, whether it's by Congress, whether it's policing standards that are put in place, things done in the state of Ohio. It allows us to stay up to date without devoting an entire officer to do nothing but research policies, procedures, and put them in place. So for the small cost that Lexipol does cost us annually, it has been more than worth it. And I would hope that council continues to support the use of it and continue to fund it, because Lexipol has really been a godsend here for us in the city, and ensuring that policies and procedures are rolled out timely, and that we do not miss them, or if something does change, that we're able to jump on that immediately versus waiting for something bad to happen before we realize there's been a change. You just would not understand how often policies, procedures change. And it's not to say that we cannot change things locally also. Just because we've adopted the Lexipol standards doesn't mean that we can go above and beyond them or tweak them in order to fit the Tiffin community better or utilize them more effectively. So it's not like it's an all or nothing sort of a situation. We're able to implement them in ways that work here in the local community. So I thank both of our chiefs and the departments for embracing them so well, and really staying ahead of the times. I think we're very blessed by the chiefs that we have at being very progressive and ensuring that we stay ahead of the curve here, and that we're not these departments that are making national news because of poor decisions or not keeping policies and procedures up to date. So I just want to get that on record here for both of our chiefs. I thank them for it.
Sure. Really quick, would you mind spelling that for me? Lex, I'm sorry.
Lexipol.
IPOL.
Yeah.
Okay, cool, thank you. And I'm sorry, Chief, did you have something?
Yeah. Just to add on to what the mayor's saying, the first thing is it's a pay me now or pay me later. It's that same argument I make every year to him about our training budget. Is either you give me the small amount, and I know it's not, when you're talking taxpayers' dollars, 10,000, 20,000, whatever it is, it doesn't appear to be, it's a large amount, but it's small amount in the aspect of one violation of the use of force, a civil lawsuit or something. You're talking 6 or 7 digits of restitution or payment out to those people, reparations. So you pay me now by letting us get Lexipol, letting us have the training and stuff. It should eliminate your, not necessarily 100%, but should eliminate your lawsuits down the road. But even when you get the lawsuits, being able to point back to the officer followed everything that's in our policy procedure is going to help you in that lawsuit down the road. And Lexipol comes with that guarantee. If they're following this stuff, then they will defend their policies that are in here. And you, like I said, when you see the federal, the best practices, the Ohio Collaborative, if there's a box next to it that's modified, it says modified, that's also what the mayor's talking about. Is we can, one of the things that took us a long time to put our policies into Lexipol is Lexipol comes pre-packaged, meaning that if you don't have any policies or your policies are so outdated, you can just take theirs, put it in, and go up from day one and start running with policies and procedures. But ours were better than the bare minimum. And Lexipol is just the bare minimum what's out there. So we had to take a large look at like our discipline, standards of conduct for officers. Theirs is just the bare minimum, and I did not like that. I did not want to lose what we had built, and the whole 22 years at that point of me being here as an officer, knowing what our standards of conduct were, and go lesser than what we were, having to be on the standards of when I started here. So it took us about 6 months to transfer everything over, read through each one, make sure that we were okay with each of the standards that Lexipol had out there, and apply some of our modifications to it. The second point is Lexipol will push out to myself and the lieutenant, the admin lieutenant, those current case laws or anything that changes, best practices. And then we get an email from them saying, here's what the change is. And if it's nothing to do with modification or anything, then myself or him can push it out to the officers right away that day. If it is a modification thing, then we got to go in and we have to make that change to our system. The third part of this whole piece of the puzzle is that it just isn't a policy that we push out and they acknowledge and it's time stamped and dated, and then they never have to look at it again. There's another aspect of Lexipol that comes with it. It's called DTBs, which is daily training bulletins. So every day, a question is generated to their email. And when they log in, they're required to take a test on the daily training bulletin. And it'll be over your major policies that are liability factors, use of force, pursuit policies, bias-based policing, a domestic violence policy. The ones that are going to get you in trouble the most, you're going to have more questions on them over the month and over the year than you are going to have on the equipment policy or uniform policy, stuff like that. So out of a 30 or 31 day month, 4, 5, 6 of them might be use of force, 4, 5, 6 of them might be domestic violence, 4, 5, 6 might be domestic violence and stuff like that. So over your days off, they're still coming into your email. So when you come on to your day off, you're gonna have 2 or 3 plus the one that is that day. So we elect to do it in a one dump every month rather than push it out every day. So as you have time, you can finish it all in one sitting if you have that time, or you can do 3 or 4 at a time. But those are also time stamped and dated. And so it's a refresher. So what it does is give you a scenario, like say use of force. It puts you or another officer and you together. It'll say Officer Smith and Officer Montz, respond to this mental situation or this crisis situation, or just do a traffic stop. And it puts you into a scenario, and then it tells you, it kind of gives you a scenario-based question, and then it'll give you the policy and procedure to reference, and then it'll give you a multiple choice question or a true or false question that you have to take. It records everything, and then at the end of the year, it spits us out a training document that tells us over the course of the year, taking all these DTVs, these are how many were done under use of force, these are how many were done under domestic violence, and altogether, your officers have done an hour and a half of training for these 5-minute questions all year. And so we list that as part of our training as well. And it's all time stamped and it's all dated. We can run reports every month who hasn't acknowledged the new policies that have come out, who hasn't taken their DTVs yet, and then they get email reminders and stuff like that. The other thing is when the new policy comes out, they get to click on a button and compare it with the old policy. It highlights what's been changed so they can read. You don't have to read through the whole thing to comprehend what's been changed. So that's just a little quick snippet. Like the mayor said, I don't want to take up all your time, but I wanted to give you even further of what Lexipol does for us. Because if it simply was just the policies and procedures and the standards, that's good. But I like the aspect of that they're constantly getting asked these questions and in different ways. It's not the same questions over and over again. Part of your fee that you pay to Lexipol is writing those. They have retired chiefs of police, they have retired sheriffs, retired attorneys that are writing these questions in ways that they're different all the time, so they don't become stale and become the same things over and over again. And officers are actually learning about the policies and procedures. Where in the past, we just gave them a 3-ring binder and told, here you go, you better know the policy on use of force, because if you're going to be held to that standard, now they're actually getting trained on it.
Great. Thank you, Chief. Yes, Mayor Rounds.
Yeah, Chief, why don't you talk just very briefly about the live training that you all did? Was it last year, I believe, that where it was the simulator and everything? And to me, that was really above and beyond, because it sounds like a lot of cities also don't do that, or at least don't do it very frequently. And
yeah,
why don't you just give a brief overview of what that was? You don't need to go too far in depth, but just to talk about some of the things that we do here that are above and beyond what a lot of communities are doing.
So like the mayor's saying, this was a machine that we paid for out of our training budget, that brings it, they're from Illinois, and we brought them in, and we try to do that once every 3 years, because it is expensive. And we do share it with the villages and the county after we get our guys through 3 times. You know, we try to give them 3 different sets of time to go through there. And it's a really realistic virtual reality type of thing. And we set it up in our training room. We've had it set up in our firearms range downstairs. And it puts them through scenarios of the shoot, don't shoot, critical incidences. And you have virtual reality weapons, whether it's a shotgun, mace, tasers, your duty weapons and stuff, that are all air compressed and everything. They feel the weight, everything's right. The scenario base has gotten a lot better from when we started doing this 10 years ago. It was kind of old and dated, but a lot of the new companies have a lot of new updated graphics and they have updated scenarios. So we even invited some of the council people down at the time that took a part in it, and some press that took part in it. And not every scenario is a shoot scenario. So it also makes the officers think critically. And the person that's trained behind there, because they come in and they spend 8 hours training a couple of our firearms instructors and sergeants to run it, so that we can run it on all of our shifts. Because we rent it for a week, for a week. And the officer behind the desk, and the sergeant or supervisor, can, depending on the officer's actions, whether they're being too timid or whether they're being too aggressive, can change the outcome of that scenario. So if this officer goes back and says, hey, you know, when you go in that brick house, there's going to be a guy to the right and he's going to shoot you, you know, before he even says anything or whatever. So if they go and tell other officers, the scenarios can all be mixed up. They have multiple endings and multiple ways to respond to. That's why we sent them through 3 different times, because they're going to get more out of it the second and third time after the initial shock and awe is of the first time. And then of course it registers everything. It records them from all angles. So if they did have to shoot, it'll show them on screen. Did they all, you know, say they fired 3 times, did all 3 rounds hit the person? Or the computer will show you, well, this one went through and then went to this house over here, or over to this playground over here, or whatever. So they got to do the whole thing. They got to take in the whole scene, the totality of the circumstances of the backdrop. If we're in a crowded parking lot, you certainly aren't going to go to your deadly force in a crowded parking lot. You're going to start looking at your less lethal options, or cutting distance between yourself and the suspect and stuff. So in a nutshell, it's another tool that we try to do every couple of years, bring this company in and do this type of realistic scenario-based training that we just don't have the funding to do every year that I would like to do. But at least it keeps them on their toes, because you can sit in a classroom all day long and tell them, you know, this is what you would do in this type of scenario. But when you actually have to go through it and have to critical think, a shoot, don't shoot scenario, is that a cell phone in their hand when they turn around real quick? Is that a gun? It actually puts them in that critical thinking pressure, which then gives them the files to draw off of later on in a situation, should we, by unfortunate circumstances, have another one in Tiffin, for them to draw on those experiences of what they just did in a scenario-based training.
No, that makes sense. Councilman Leopard.
Thank you. After a council meeting, Councilwoman Yanatuno, myself, and Tyler Schuff went down to the training room, and we were able to take part in that program. What a great program. And found out one thing: Tyler Schuff is a sniper. I think every shot he fired was between the eyes or in the forehead.
It gets better every year with the realistic VR training and everything like that. It does get better. The acting gets better. You know, that's one of the biggest complaints is you're gonna get those B or C actors that, you know, are really rigid and cold and stuff, and you want it to be as realistic as possible.
That was a fantastic program.
Actually, Tyler shot at everything available. He didn't hold back.
Okay. Yes, Councilman Gillig.
Thank you, Councilwoman Boyle. I've just been thrilled with this presentation. Part of my asking for this to go to committee was to get all of this information out to the public because it was my belief, which has been very much solidified by the chief, that Tiffin Police Department has been ahead of the curve. And I know we have our law and community planning meeting here, which is being broadcast. We'll have Councilwoman Boyle's phenomenal committee reports that she prepares. I'm just wondering if we can brainstorm other options to get this information available to our friends and neighbors in the community, because I think this is something we can really hang our hat on. This is pretty exceptional.
Yes, President Fote.
Thanks, Councilwoman Boyle. I think one suggestion that I would have is that Chief does such a great job presenting this. If we could get him to come to one of our council meetings and, you know, give him some time and let him kind of explain this to people, I think that would be one of the best ways. And hopefully the paper will pick it up and run with it. So.
Absolutely. Yes, Chief Stevens.
Yeah, I would have no qualms about doing that. I love that to get the information out there. I would love to be able to put it up on the screen so the public at home can see it. And you guys, I know I emailed it to you all and you know, what our response to aggression resistance forum looks like. I mean, it's pretty complicated and it covers all the bases of everything and the levels of review. You know, it's not just a form that's filled out and then filed with the report. It then goes to their sergeant who has to check a box that says force is within policy or it's not within policy. Then it goes to the lieutenant who does the same thing, reads through all the documentation, reads through the report. Then it comes to me for a third level of review. And just because you may check the box force not within policy, we may find an outlier where it didn't meet our policy, but guess what? I think our policy needs to change because of the actions of the officer was correct. But in this case, it didn't match our policy. And why didn't it match our policy? Because maybe something has changed with the best practices or it's a one-off situation. And now we have to rethink our policy to fit the action that the officer or the suspect did. So just because you get a checkbox, which has only happened once in my 8 years here, and that was a really unusual situation, but most of the stuff has to go through that 3-level. And of course, if it's a sergeant that does the force or a lieutenant, then it skips that level of review. But they're all saved. I add them up, tally everything up at the end of the year. And that's the same thing that those reports that I put in the email is the same reports that I give you every year in the annual report summary that's attached at the end that tells you all the statistics of our low amount of use of force. You know, when you're dealing with the thousands and 10,000s of contacts that we have a year with the public, you know, 15,000 calls for services and how many traffic stops. So you're into the 20,000s, and then we have, you know, 1,300 arrests, and we only have 11 use of force incidences, or 13, or even 20. That's a very minuscule amount of times that we had to respond to the aggressiveness of the officers. And I attribute that to the training and the supervision and the accountability of this form, of our policies and procedures, and what the officers do in their training to get that de-escalation tactics and to get the crisis intervention training and everything that we do. So kudos to all of that together. It makes it a safer community and a safer department.
Awesome. if everyone's in agreement with that, as far as Chief Stevens coming to council to present, do we want to try and schedule this and put this on the calendar now? Does that work for you, Chief? Or I'm sorry, Mayor, go ahead.
Why don't you let us talk about this internally and get a date set? We've got several presentations at the next several council meetings, and unless you all want to be up there till midnight, why don't you let us, we'll take care of getting it scheduled inside if that's okay.
No, that's perfect. Yeah, thank you. I just want to make sure it wasn't overlooked. Yes, Chief.
As long as it's before October 31st.
Why, what happens after that?
I'll still be available, but I'll come up as a citizen and present for you if you want. So
You can't leave.
I'm having second thoughts myself.
Okay, great. So yeah, Mayor, we'll just lean on you then to schedule that internally with the team and Chief. Is there anyone else that had any comments or questions regarding this topic? Okay, great. So, oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Councilman Leopard.
Thank you. When I wrote down the 8 items, I put a big star beside require warning before shooting because I didn't really agree with that, and I'm glad that the chief brought that out.
Yeah, it is in there that it is a requirement that we try, but again, you look at the reasonableness test, and when we go back to, I guess, do an after action review of any critical incident, that will be one of the things that will be looked at is, was there an opportunity for the officer to do that? And that would be, answered at that time.
Thank you.
Okay, is there any public comment? I don't think we have many attendees. It looks like Mr. Watson's out there by himself. So with that, I would like to transition into the second topic, which is the possibility or the possibilities of having trick or treat for Halloween this year due to the impact of COVID-19. Councilman Leopard.
Thank you. I don't think it's in the city's best interest to encourage trick or treating. I would hate to have my city's name attached to that, especially when you have kids going up to 100 houses per evening. I just don't think it. I don't think I can endorse it.
Okay. Does anyone else have thoughts on that? Councilman Gillig?
Well, the city's role is essentially just to pick a date, correct, Mr. Mayor?
Yes, we've in the past just announced what day it is. I guess there's some question over whether announcing the date means that we are endorsing it as well. Probably so. We're monitoring the rates locally for cases and whatnot. The health commissioner Schweitzer did tell me that she believes if we do go red, that she's going to order all public events to be canceled, which of course this would fall under that as a public event. Looking at a lot of our data, I think it's more likely than not that we're going to go red before we go back down to yellow. Looking at the data out, there was some good news and bad news today. Our active cases dropped by 13. However, the deaths doubled. We went from 4 deaths to 8. And then hospitalizations also have increased to the highest that they've been, current hospitalizations. So those factors are not going to help us on the new ranking system that the Ohio Department of Health and the governor's office has put out. It's going to be an interesting few weeks here. I think that is her plan. At least the last communication I had heard from her was that if we are red, she's going to cancel public events. I know the county commissioners have stated that if they go red, that automatically means the closure of all county offices to the public. So it's one of the things that we're keeping an eye on. I have a feeling that as we get closer to Halloween and trick or treat time, which as of now at least is scheduled for the 25th, that's Sunday the 25th at 6 p.m. As we get closer to that date, we'll have better data. Unlike the fireworks, we're not under a time crunch because other than folks buying candy or Halloween costumes, those types of things can wait until much closer to the date, unlike our fireworks, where we had a deadline to meet, that if we were going to sign a contract, that we would not have been able to get any of our funding back. It's a little bit different scenario here. I think we can wait closer to the date. I hear loud and clear what Councilman Leopard is stating. I would just hate to cancel this far out, but yeah, we're going to monitor. And if we are a red county, or heaven forbid, let's hope and pray we don't get to purple, then that would of course change a lot of things. But I think all the decisions that we need to look at here, at least what we're doing from the administration standpoint, all of our decisions are what is in the best interest of keeping Seneca County out of red and especially purple levels. That's what every decision that we are making is literally centered around those things, because we cannot afford another shutdown again. We all know purple means shutdown. So we really need to make every decision to keep us away from red, because the next step after red, of course, is purple. So let's just keep that in mind as we're making decisions on events. We all want to get back to being normal again, but we can't afford another shutdown. So that's what we're keeping our focus on right now, is how we avoid that happening.
Great. Any other comments, questions? Yes, Councilman Perry.
Yeah, I kind of agree with the mayor. I just think it's too far out to even really try and make any decisions about it yet. I'd rather just kind of see what the situation is closer to October and kind of, react accordingly. Obviously not looking good now, but maybe, closer to October, look better. Obviously with fireworks, you got to buy those way ahead of time. So I say just kind of monitor it as it goes.
Yes, Councilman Gillig.
Thanks, Councilwoman Boyle. Yes, I would tend to agree with Councilman Leopard and Councilman Perry and with Mayor Mons. Even though, Halloween is my absolute favorite time of the year. I do think, as Councilman Perry said, we're probably a little bit too far out to make any decisions, but it's still probably good to get the information out there that the city does have this on their radar. And then maybe that can allow some community organizations, which has been one of the really cool things about the pandemic, how many different community organizations have stepped up and provided, services and alternatives to what we get to traditionally enjoy, back when the world was relatively normal. So it'll just be nice to get that out there, that, folks might want to start thinking of some things, in case, heaven forbid, things get worse and we do have to look into canceling. But I appreciate the committee taking the time to address this.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, any other comments? Okay, so it sounds like for this topic then, I think we can all agree that right now it's a little too early to make a call of canceling or anything like that. I think the committee agrees to just continue to monitor the situation closely with COVID, and we can revisit this as we get closer to that date. Is there any other business to be discussed in this meeting today? Yes, Mayor Mons.
Yes, so Matt Watson has been listening, not because he's curious about things, but because we wanted to also discuss Ohio Public Works Commission grant funding with this committee, since it was most likely the committee it would have run through. It should be fairly quick, so I don't know if while I'm talking, if Kathy, if you're listening, if you could bring Matt in as a panelist so he can also discuss. So if you recall, most years the city of Tiffin applies for Ohio Public Works Commission funding. to help assist with various projects in the community, road construction, bridge construction, sewer repairs, but it cannot be used for new construction. So you can't go out and use it to build a new road or a new alley or a new sidewalk or sewer system, but what it is used for is to enhance or fix failing sewer systems, streets, bridges, etc. We were very unsure whether or not there would be any funding this year due to the state of Ohio's budget, because that is where the funding comes from. However, we did find out last week that Ohio Public Works Commission has been funded by the state. There is a strong likelihood that the funding will be reduced. It will not be as much as it usually is. But we are here to essentially ask this committee to introduce legislation in the very near future to City Council to allow us to move forward with a grant application. It would be for street paving, using our current street paving budget as a match for funding. However, the engineer's office is working to get estimates for it, so it will not be ready for introduction at the next council meeting, most likely. It would be the council meeting on September the 8th. However, at that meeting, we would need to, due to the timeliness of it, need to request that City Council suspend and pass under emergency at that first reading, allowing us to apply for the funding, because the application is due by the 18th of September, before the next council meeting after that. Obviously, if we obtain the grant, as we have done, I believe, every year that we've applied, it would see additional money that would then be used directly to help with street paving dollars. It makes the road and bridge levy that was passed by voters, it makes those dollars go further and allows us to complete additional work. I know I guess I haven't seen Matt brought in yet, so I'm guessing maybe Kathy did not hear the request, and I can't bring him in, unfortunately.
Are you able to allow Matt Watson to come in as a panelist?
Yeah, that's my fear. I'm guessing Kathy may have stepped out of her office and is unable to hear that. So
I'm sorry, did you need something?
yes, Kathy, could you bring Matt Watson, the city
Oh,
engineer?
absolutely. I'm so sorry. I'm running two
Thank you.
sessions right now.
It's
Sorry.
okay. Yeah, we figured you were quite busy. So yes, so we wanted to present this to you all now, knowing that we were only going to have time for one reading, so that essentially this committee could discuss it. Then we could bring it up again at the next council meeting next Monday, but not have the formal legislation ready to go, in hopes that you all will suspend and pass this on the council meeting on Tuesday, the 8th of September, because we're under a deadline. And the only other option would be to have a couple of special meetings just to pass a grant application that doesn't cost us anything. And if we're successful, we'll bring in additional revenue to allow us to pave even more streets next year. So Councilwoman Boyle, if you would be willing to allow Matt Watson, the city engineer, to speak a little further on this, I would really appreciate it.
I guess I'll allow it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman Boyle, and Mayor, you did a great job explaining the overview of the program and what our intent is at the city. So just kind of building on what the mayor said, the Ohio Public Works Commission, there's $500,000 available with each application on an annual basis. That can either be through a 0% loan, or it can also be through direct money that can be used as a reimbursement at the time that you have to pay the contractor through the project. So as the mayor said, time's of an essence. September 18th, the application's due. Just to be transparent about the whole program, I know I would also urge you guys to have Councilman Jones watch this video as it's being streamed on Facebook, as we're going to need the 3 reading rule suspended. But September 18th, the application's due. I will meet with the county committee on October 8th to present our application, which is composed of either the mayor of the city of Tiffin or city of Fostoria, a county commissioner, and a county engineer. Our application would then be presented to the OPWC district, I believe in November. where we usually obtain information on whether or not we were successful with our application. And then usually a contract is presented to us late winter, early spring of the following year, and the funding becomes available July 1. So the objective, as the mayor said, is just to leverage as much money as possible with the 1/4% road and bridge levy fund that we have available. Most grant sources out there, whether they're federal or state, this is a state fund, do require a local match. The more money you have to match, the more points you usually score on your application. Being that we have an influx of road and bridge levy funds, we are scoring very well on our applications recently, and being able to bring back a lot of state and federal money to the city of Tiffin, which is a huge success. And that was the main reason and one of the focus points that we presented to the community at the time of campaigning for that levy. As I said, it's been successful. We're bringing in about $1.2 million a year with the road and bridge levy. So the levy is on a 5-year renewal basis. So 5 times 1.2, we're looking at about $6 million in local funding over that first 5 years. I will not be surprised, and I'm going to say that we're going to be above $10 million. When it's all said and done, we're going to turn that $6 million into excess of $10 million over that first 5-year period. So, I mean, simple math, we're doing all of our infrastructure projects on a 60-40 basis. We're going to bring some more good news to City Council as a whole in the near future with another grant we were successful in obtaining. But as far as OPWC goes, so 2 years ago, we were successful. As the mayor said, we've been successful every year that at least I've been city engineer with turning in an application. 2 years ago, we got $247,400 from OPWC that assisted in a $664,000 paving project. That was the first year that the road and bridge levy was in place and maximized our paving budget from $400 to $664. This year, we did get $100,000 from OPWC. We have 2 street paving projects currently underway, and we'll be paving $850,000 worth of roads, which is double what we were before the road and bridge levy. Next year, the plan is, as the mayor said, to also turn in an application, which will be towards road improvements and street resurfacing. The request will probably come in somewhere between 100 and 125,000, which will be 30 to 40% of that project alone. It's looking like we're going to have 3 street paving projects within the city of Tiffin next year, and combined between the 3, we're going to be at about 1.25 million. So 1.5 times the amount that we're spending this year, which is double what we spent before the road and bridge levy. So it's definitely, we're going in the right direction. I think one question that somebody might ask, I said it's a $500,000 max application. Why would we only submit for 100 to 125,000 when we have the money there to leverage our application amongst everybody else? The reason behind that is that program does benefit a lot of other entities in Seneca County. The townships, the county itself, the city of Fostoria, they all also rely on this funding for infrastructure projects on an annual basis. So we all try to play nice in the same sandbox. If we do have an application where we know we have a large project coming and we're going to need the full ask, we do try to be upfront, open, and honest about that. And our project and our application is next year. So next year, the plan is to submit the full $500,000 money application for the replacement of the Ellis Street River Bridge project. So that's a $4.5 million project, as we all know. We've already secured $2 million in funding from the Municipal Bridge Program, federal funding administered through ODOT. So we still have a $2.5 million gap. So we're planning to go after OPWC to pick up $500,000 off that gap. And the county engineer and everybody is aware that that's going to be our ask next year. That project's supposed to start in the fall of 2022. So if we request the money at the end of 2021, that OPWC money would become available July 1 of 2022, and it lines up well with our project. So basically, in summary, it's September 18th 's the deadline. As the mayor said, we're going to use it towards street resurfacing. We don't have the exact roads locked down at this time. I do have a pretty good idea of where I want to use it. As I presented to council, I believe last year, we have a pretty thorough process with our street paving program. Everything's rated on a 1 to 5 ranking. I do have a proposed street paving project list projected out for 5 years. It changes on an annual basis. We try to maximize the amount we're paving on an annual basis. But those estimates are merely just from using the GIS here in the office and pulling quantities that way. So starting tomorrow, like I said, like the mayor said, we were just informed last week. So we're turning this around as quick as we can. We also have the Ellis Street Canal Bridge going on. We have the 2 paving projects going on, but we're not going to let this opportunity for, an extra $100,000 to $125,000 slip through our fingers. So starting tomorrow, we're going to get out and start doing the field work in the area that I have in mind. So we can put an actual estimate on paper through with what the actual quantities that are going to be needed in the field. And I promise you by your September 8th council meeting, you'll have that list. And just so you have an understanding of the area that we're looking at for this project, the main road would be Hudson Street between Washington and Wall, the entire length of Hudson. And then what we're going to do is piggyback some of the smaller streets off of Hudson to include in that program so that we can get good bids from the contractor and they don't have to mobilize all over town. So the theory is we'll have our normal street paving program where we'll space paving projects out amongst all wards. This one, Hudson Street's a longer stretch of road. So that helps build the costs initially. And then we'll, look at all the side roads that come off of that and try to get to a number of $300,000 to $400,000, where when you take the 30 to 40% of the project cost that we would be asking OPWC to fund, we're looking at $100,000 to $125,000 grant application.
Yes, Mayor Mons.
Yes, Matt, could you repeat again what you said you expect the total approximately to be spent over the 5 years on roads here in the city, paving?
Well, between roads and bridges, we're going to bring in $6 million in revenue through the 1/4% road and bridge levy. That's based on a projection of $1.2 million a year for 5 years. So far, we've leveraged, without telling you what all the grants that we've received so far, we've leveraged over $3.2 million in federal funding over the last 2 years to date. I've already said in this report that we've leveraged $350,000 in OPWC funding. We're going to have an application for another $500,000 in OPWC funding next year. The year after that, we're going to be proactive as well. Maybe even think differently. Maybe we'll try to take advantage of that loan through OPWC. There's $500,000 available. There's always loan money that's not used, and just maximize the amount we do over that 5-year period. So yeah, we're going to have in excess of $10 million worth of improvements on our roads and bridges over the next 5 years based off of $6 million in local money. So we're going to be somewhere between 50 and 60% local to somewhere between 40 and 50% either federally or state funded.
Yeah, and the reason I asked you to repeat that, I heard it obviously, but it's absolutely incredible. For you council members that were not here before the road and bridge levy passed, we actually used to spend usually $400,000 to $500,000 per year on streets and bridges every year. So, you equate that out, without the road and bridge levy, we'd be looking at $2 to $2.5 million most likely spent on our streets over these 5 years. But because of the road and bridge levy, the engineer just confirmed that we're going to see at least $10 million, likely more, spent on roads and bridges in this community over a 5-year period, thanks to that road and bridge levy passing. And that's the point that we keep trying to hammer home to folks is, you look at where we were a few years ago, where we're going to be at the end of this cycle of the grant or of the increase that was passed by the voters. it's incredible to see the extreme spike that we've been able to do in getting our streets and our bridges in this community paved and upgraded, fixed, so that motorists and visitors to this community can really feel that lasting impact. So a huge thank you to the engineer's office and everyone that served to help us get that levy passed, because we're seeing the results now. Pretty extreme to go from $2 to $2.5 million to over $10 million in the same time period. It's just incredible. So thank you.
Great, thank you. Any questions for Matt or the mayor regarding that? Okay, so just so I'm understanding, we need to make a motion for legislation for the September 8th meeting, correct?
Yes, please.
Danny or Steve, would one of you like to make a motion for the law director to prepare legislation for the September 8th council meeting regarding this topic? Yes, Councilman Perry.
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion to ask the law director to prepare legislation. And if you could help me word that, Mayor.
To prepare legislation to allow for, Brent, who's the authority on this one? Is it me or Dale to sign the application, or does it truly matter which one's listed as the signee?
I don't think it matters. I think last year you did it.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I have had my name on it in the past. So just go ahead and so Danny, it would be a motion to allow for the mayor to submit a grant for it would be what, 2020 Ohio Public Works Commission application cycle.
Perfect. Got
Sound
that.
good? So do you want to just say a motion to do what I just said?
Yeah, motion for that.
Perfect. So that's
I'll second the motion.
Great, all in favor? Motion by signified by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion carries. Okay, is there anything else for this committee to discuss? Oh, Councilman Gillig.
Well, not to discuss, but I just wanted to thank all of you very much for your time today and your consideration, particularly with the A Can't Wait initiative and the Halloween parade. Also wanted to thank Chief Stevens for his time and his leadership and expertise in the area. And would also like to ask Matt Watson to represent me if I ever need to ask for money for anything in the future. Holy geez, that was impressive.
No, agreed. Yeah, thank you, Matt.
I'll second that motion.
Both very much for your time and all the information that you provided to the committee today. If no one has anything else, I will motion to adjourn the meeting. All right, great. Thank you guys very much.